Thank you very much for the lovely introduction. That was really very, very generous. Thank you. I'm so glad you passed. I'm so pleased to be here because I nearly wasn't here. I had a lot of problems with travel documents and visas. I was going to go to India first and then come here, and the whole trip nearly fell apart completely. But at the last moment I managed to come here, so I'm very, very glad to be here and very relieved. So, good morning. Let me just introduce what I'm talking about today. Basically, I want to show you some stuff. I want to show you some practical stuff. It's not a theoretical talk. I'd like to show you some practical classroom management techniques. I'm not going to tell you things you already know, I hope. I'm sure you're very familiar with basic classroom management. You're familiar with putting people into pairs and groups. You're familiar with giving instructions. You're familiar with writing on the board. I'm not going to waste your time by talking about those things. I'd like to talk about what might be a higher skill set of classroom management. A lot of people worry about what method they use in teaching. Which method do I use? I don't think method matters very much. I think you can teach in almost any way you want to. It doesn't matter which method you use. What's much more important is your classroom management. How well you look after the organisation of the classroom. Sorry, I'm just going to ask a question about my voice. For me here it sounds very echoey. Is it okay for you? Can you hear clearly? Yeah? Okay. So what is classroom management? I'd say classroom management is a set of learnable techniques. There are things that you can learn and then you can do. It's not magic, it's stuff that you can actually study and get better at. But it's not just the techniques, it's also attitudes. It's what you think about students, it's what you think about learning. The techniques without the attitudes don't work, they collapse. So I'm just going to give a little introduction on attitudes, and then I'd like to move on to showing you the practical stuff. A definition first of all, what is classroom management? I'd say classroom management is the way that you manage students' learning by organising and controlling what happens in your classroom. So organisation, control. Management. But it's not just that, it's also the way that you consciously decide not to organise and control. There may be reasons why you choose not to do that. You choose that for some time you're not going to organise people. You're not going to constantly tell people what to do. Or you may delegate that control. You may give up your control. You may relinquish it so that maybe your students take control of some stages of the lesson. And that giving up control is also your classroom management. Or it's also what happens or what doesn't happen when you're just ignorant of the choices that you have. A lot of classrooms run on ignorant classroom management. The teacher doesn't know what is possible or what is not possible, and things just happen by mistake. This is my first ever time here. I've never been to Sarawak before. So I know nothing, almost nothing, apart from what I've learned in the last 2 days about your teaching situation, your classrooms, your students. So please treat anything I say with great suspicion, because I don't know your students in your rooms. I'm going to tell you some ideas that seem to be useful ideas, but they may not be for you. So please listen to everything and process it, and if necessary, reject it. Or be inspired to think of an alternative that does work for you. Classroom management is very complex. What works in one classroom doesn't work in the classroom next door. What works with one teacher doesn't work with the teacher down the corridor. You can't ever say, here is a magic formula, this will be the answer. And although I'm going to show you some things that I think are useful, they may well not be answers to you in your situation. So classroom management is complex. I can't give you magic answers. But having said that, I'd like to also say that classroom management is very simple as well, in the fact that I do believe there are a small number of very useful techniques that do apply in many, many different situations and can make a dramatic difference to the quality of teaching and, more importantly, the quality of learning that goes on in classrooms. So it's complex, but there's also some great simplicity to it. In my country, in the United Kingdom, a lot of people write books about classroom management. And many of these books are mainly about discipline, about keeping order in the classroom. Here's a book. I've been very polite and I've covered up one of the words in the title. This book is called Getting the to Behave. Now, I won't tell you the word underneath there. I'll just tell you it is a very, very rude word. And it's a word full of contempt for the students. It's basically saying that the students are nasty, evil creatures, and their only job is to try and annoy the teacher, misbehave, and cause problems. And this book is a book about classroom management. I think it's the best-selling book on classroom management in England. And that's rather sad, really. That's rather sad because it suggests that there is an attitude here that my job as a teacher is to somehow suppress, to push down, to control in a very aggressive way these nasty, evil germs of students. The author was very successful with this book and then decided to go on and write lots more. So here's another one, Getting to Learn. The same attitude through both books. Sorry, that's actually a different author, but the same idea, the same series. This is the same author. This is Sue Cowley again. She has contempt for teachers as well. Look, teaching skills for dummies. Okay, I know it's a series. I know there's lots of books for dummies, but somehow in this case, that is her real attitude. She believes not only students are nasty and stupid, but teachers are too. I shouldn't be rude about another writer, but I have to just make one comment. This book is the worst book I've ever read about teaching. So if you're looking for a really bad book on teaching, I recommend this. The whole book, I think she must really hate her job as a teacher, because she doesn't like students, she doesn't like teachers, she doesn't like teaching. You really wonder, what is this person doing in her profession? I'm going to just read you an excerpt from this last book. And it's meant to be a slightly provocative excerpt, because I think you might agree with it, but I'm going to tell you why I don't agree with it afterwards. So here is Sue Cowley from that book, and she's describing a teacher's job. And she says, your aim is to develop an air of confidence, self-control, and a mastery of everything that happens in your classroom. Teaching is putting on a great performance, one in which you have a stage on which to perform, a show to present, an audience watching your every move, a character to step into. When you're on that stage, being the teacher, you're not playing yourself. Okay, I know a lot of teachers are quite comfortable with the metaphor of the teacher is a performer, the teacher is an actor. That there seem to be some similarities in the roles of teacher and actor. But for me, this is taking it much too far. What she's saying here is, when you are a teacher, you are not really a teacher, you are pretending to be a teacher. You are playing the role of a teacher. you don't have students, you have an audience, you have a show, and your job is to perform and to appear to be very confident and to be very entertaining, and your students will sit there going, oh, and enjoying everything that you do. Now, for me, that's absolutely the opposite view of what I think teaching is. I believe I can only teach when I am being at least approximately myself. If I am pretending to be somebody else, the students see through that immediately. They see that I am pretending, and then they start pretending. They start pretending to be students, or good students, or bad students, I don't know. But then the whole of the classroom is a fake. I would much rather be me talking to you. So for me, there's something wrong here. I'd like to contrast her view with the American psychologist, Carl Rogers. This was what he said. He's been dead quite a few years now, but I think he's still what he has to say is still very pertinent. He said, it's quite customary for teachers to rather consciously put on the mask, the role, the facade of being a teacher, and to wear this facade all day, removing it only when they've left school at night. The teacher can be a real person in her relationship with her students. She can be enthusiastic, can be bored, can be interested in students, can be angry, can be sensitive and sympathetic. And thus, she is a person to her students. Now, for me, I'm much more comfortable with that attitude. I would like to be a person to my students. I would like my students to be people to me, whether they're 4 or 5 years old, or 10 years old, or 18 years old. I'd like them to be real as is possible in the classroom situation. So that's why I say that attitude is important. It's not just techniques, but it's how you approach the teaching situation. It's what you believe a student is and what you believe a teacher is. And that makes a difference. You can't just go in and do the techniques without that. Enough talk. I'm going to show you some examples of classroom management. And I'm particularly asking this question, what might be a higher skill set of classroom management? So not just the basic stuff, not just the putting into pairs and groups and things. And I'd like to answer these aims, really. This is what I'm hoping for. I'd like to actively intervene in order to manage and manipulate the interaction in class and the learning. Manipulate is quite an old-fashioned word in teaching. We don't do much manipulation nowadays. But I'd like to, rather than just allow whatever happens to happen, I would like to actually take control a little bit more of that and make sure that the most learning that is possible happens. Particularly in order to balance the participation levels. When I watch lessons, as Shannon mentioned, one of the things I do in my work is I watch a huge number of teachers teaching all over the world. And something I see almost everywhere I go is that in almost every class, 3 or 4 strong, fast, loud students dominate the lesson. They steal the lesson. They do almost all the talking, they have almost all the questions and the answers and the interaction. And the rest of the class just puts their heads down and keeps quiet and tries to avoid being involved. It seems to be a universal teaching problem that a few students do most of the work. But if you're going to teach a class, you want everyone to be involved. You want everyone to get the most out of it that's possible. So how can I balance the levels of participation so that it's not just the fast ones? Can I bring in the quieter, slower students and give them an equal chance in the classroom? Can I give everybody a role? Can I give everybody a say? Part of it is simply training students to listen to each other, not just to listen to the teacher. Because when people start listening to each other, there is much more interaction, much more engagement around the room. So those are the aims of the things that I'd like to show you today. Okay, so that's all the talk. And the rest of this, I'm going to show you some practical techniques. Now, I said sometimes classroom management is ridiculously simple. I'm going to start with a technique that is so simple, you might not even notice it. It's so simple. The first technique is called finger lock. Sometimes in class you want to ask the student a question. You want to ask a question to the student. And in your head, maybe you're thinking, I'd really like to let this student answer the question. So, what do you think about smoking? You think smoking is a good idea, yes? Okay, you think it's all right. What about you? What do you think about smoking? So, yes, you. So you agree with him, yes? You think it's okay, very good. But we're having a very good discussion here. I'm really enjoying this, yes. What about you? What's your opinion on smoking? You hate smoking. You think it's a really bad idea and people should stop doing it, yes? Do you see what I'm doing? I'm exaggerating a bit. But what I'm doing is quite a normal thing that teachers do. They want students to say sentences. You want them to say something. But you're so desperate for them to say something that as soon as the student says the first word, you're coming in and saying, you're stealing, you're hijacking what the student says. When I started teaching, I found myself doing this a lot. I knew I didn't want to do it. I knew that I wanted the students to speak. But somehow, as soon as the student said the first word, I found myself coming in and talking over them. And then I thought of this technique, and I'll show you the technique now. So this is the technique. So, what do you think about smoking?
I think it's really bad for your health.
Okay, thank you. And what about you? What do you think about smoking? Okay, can you see what I'm doing? I told you it's a ridiculously simple technique. All I'm doing is, when I ask somebody a question, I'm just putting my fingers over my lips. Now, it doesn't do anything, really, except it reminds me not to speak. It's a reminder to myself not to speak. Now, it sounds ludicrously simple, but for me, this is one of the things that changed my teaching. Because when I started doing this, I'd ask a question, I remember every time I asked a question, put your fingers over your lips, and I found suddenly the students were talking a bit more. Because the fingers were reminding me not to talk. And I kept them there until the student had finished what they wanted to say, and then I took them away. So there you are. It's a very, very simple, very basic idea, a reminder to yourself that you want to let the student speak. It's only a reminder because, of course, you can talk through your fingers, so it's only a reminder. It has one other very good feature, though. One other very good feature. When you put your fingers over your lips, you look very intelligent. Well, I think I look intelligent. Anyway, so there's one idea. As simple as possible, but so simple, yet it has the possibility to change things. Because when students get the chance to speak more, then the whole balance of interaction in the class starts to change. Okay, let's move on. I said I wasn't going to talk about giving instructions. I'm sure you've had lots of input about giving clearer, better instructions. But it always seems to me the problem with instructions isn't the instructions themselves. It's what happens before the instructions. That very often teachers give instructions to noisy rooms. That the students are all, I don't know what your students do, but they're all talking to each other, finishing the previous exercise, maybe looking at their phones under the table. Do they do that? Not in your classes, maybe. But they're all doing other things. And the teacher sort of says, okay, turn to, listen! And maybe you don't go that loud. The teacher has to sort of get louder and louder to overtake the noise in the room. So I think quite an important thing with giving instructions is before you even start the instruction, to try to gather all the attention in the room to yourself. To try and pull people's attention to you. Now, obviously, there's no single way to do that. There are lots of ways you can do that. What I tend to do is I just say, listen. Turn to page 63 and do exercise 2. So, again, it's very simple. I'm sure you're familiar with things like this. So I say, listen, I make a gesture, but then I bounce my eyes around as many eyes in the room as I can. When people make eye contact with you, they tend to calm down a little bit. They tend to get a little bit quieter. So you're basically pulling people's attention to you. You're holding them with your magic eye to keep their attention. Of course, some children won't pay attention then. There'll be children over here talking. And what you can do then is you just very calmly, you're bouncing your eyes around, and then you come to them and you just don't need to shout. You just keep your eyes on them. And probably people nearby them will start going, teacher. Of course, you may need to be more demonstrative than that. You may need to say, listen again, or you may need to say something else. But what I don't want to get into a shouting competition with the students. I want to be able to give an instruction over silence, if possible. So the basic idea of getting attention before you give an instruction. Traffic cop. Traffic policeman. I'm sure you use some gestures in your teaching. So, for example, already when I asked people to speak, I was saying, what do you think? Some teachers like pointing, what do you think? Personally, I don't like people pointing at me. It feels a bit rude. So I tend to use an overarm gesture combined with eye contact, which is quite targeted. You know who I'm looking at. You know who it is that I want to speak to if I do that. So basic traffic policeman, basic traffic cop is just indicating who you want to speak by a combination of gesture and eye contact. Obviously you can say the name as well if you want to. But let's take it a step further. Let's imagine a situation where over here I have a very weak student here. Excuse me, picking you out. I have a very weak student. This is one of the students in my class who doesn't talk very much. It's very quiet and takes longer than other students to say something, even if it's just a word. But if it's 3 or 4 words, they need time to prepare. So maybe I've decided I would really like the student to say something. So I say, what do you think is the answer? Now this student is going to take a little bit of time. Now over here, I have a very strong student. And immediately she's going, teacher, teacher, teacher. Or something like that. Do they put up hands in your classes? Yeah. Do they shout out, teacher, teacher? Yeah, okay. So she's already over there doing that. Now, I've watched this so many times in so many classes. Students like this one here, the loud student, they are magnetic. They are magnetic to teachers. Because I want him to speak, she starts calling out, the magnetism pulls my head around. I make eye contact with her, and that gives her permission to speak. She says the answer, and I'm feeling a bit bad, but I completely forget about him. And it happens again and again. And this is one of the ways that the strong, loud students steal the lesson from everybody else. Because they're keen, because they've got the answer first. So part of being a traffic policeman is remembering that loud students are magnetic and not allowing yourself to be magnetised by them. So very simply, I want him to speak. I say, what do you think is the answer? She starts calling out and calling out. I'm consciously controlling my head here. It looks easy to the students. It looks like I'm doing nothing. It looks like I haven't heard her. But inside I'm going, don't turn your head, Jim. Don't turn your head, Jim. Don't look at her. Because as soon as I make eye contact, I give her permission to speak. But I'm saying to myself, don't do it, don't do it. And I'm trying to stay as relaxed as possible with him. just to give them a few more seconds opportunity. Because even 5 more seconds, 4 more seconds makes a huge difference to his chances of producing something. Now, it's quite stressful because she's so keen. She's going, teacher, teacher, teacher. So the temptation is I start going, come on, come on. Come on, give me an answer. No, that won't help him. I have to stay relaxed. I have to stay relaxed. I have to intentionally not hear her. I have to deliberately not hear her. Now, very often, simply not paying attention, she will quieten down after 2 or 3 seconds. She'll give up. Not every student, but some students will give up. But they'll see, okay, he's staying with the student, I'll give up. If she goes on and on, then maybe I need to do more. Maybe I need a traffic policeman gesture. Yeah, something like that. Again, if possible, without making eye contact. Just indicating, look, I don't want you to talk, I want him to talk. You may need to say, I'll ask you later, okay? Just very quickly, a clear, short instruction, and then coming back. But keep the intention. If you would like a quiet student to speak, give them the chance, give them the opportunity. So I've just mentioned intentionally not hearing. At some moments in the lesson, yes, you can actually hear what they're saying, but you act as if you don't hear what they're saying. You choose not to hear. If you've never done that before, it feels very rude the first time you do it. It feels as if you're ignoring people. But this is not a conversation in a restaurant or a staff room. It's you being professional. It's you choosing to give other people an opportunity, not just the loud student. Okay, so we're thinking about how can we help those quieter students to have more opportunity in class? How can I work so that it's not only the loud student that gets the opportunity? Now, I've got another weak student over here. This is a weak student who is very, very quiet. Whenever I ask the student a question, she'll say something like, I'm sorry, I'm characterizing you. I have no idea what you're like in reality. But she speaks very, very quietly. It's one of the paradoxes of professional classroom management that what works in real everyday life doesn't necessarily work in the classroom. Sometimes the opposite works. Now, in social life, if you're with friends, and you ask a question to your friend in a cafe or something, and your friend speaks quietly, well, the obvious natural thing to do is you move a bit closer, maybe you lean in and say, sorry, what was that? And she gives you the answer. But if you do that in the classroom, you come closer to the student, and you lean in, then you will be able to hear what she says. But nobody else will in the room. It'll be a little private conversation. Students over there will start playing games and checking their phones again or whatever they do. So that's not what I want in my classroom. I would like the conversations to be public. I'd like the conversations to be heard by lots of different people. So, as I say, it's a paradox. In real life, in social life, you'd move closer. In professional life, it actually works much better if you ask a question, she's very quiet, instead of moving closer, you do the opposite. Go away. I walk backwards, but that's dangerous and stupid. You don't have to walk backwards, you can walk forwards. I noticed if anybody came to my workshop yesterday, I noticed myself doing it in the workshop yesterday when some people were talking. If somebody was very close to me and answered a question or something, I found myself automatically just trying to move away. Now, she's over there now, and she's a human. She knows that if somebody is further away, you have to talk louder. So I might now say, sorry, what was your answer? She will now say it, and she will naturally, I hope, speak a little bit louder. And that means that if I can hear it here, more people in the rest of the room can hear it. So it's a very small technique again, but it's encouraging more people to be part of the conversation. And when she's answered the question, and we've actually heard the answer, something that many teachers do with quiet students, it's very common, very typical, is that they repeat what the student has just said. So let's just take a very simple thing. Maybe I asked her, what's the name of her pet? And she says, rabbit. So then I say, oh, rabbit, rabbit. You've got a rabbit. Now what that does, my repeating, it's teaching you that you never need to listen to another student. Because anything that a student says, the teacher is going to repeat. Now you're actually training your students to not listen to each other. So it's very helpful if you could find a way not to do that. Instead of repeating, start training them to listen to each other. So she says, rabbit, over there. And I say, do you have the same pet? And now he's probably going to say, I don't know. What did she say? I wasn't listening. Because he's expecting me to repeat it. But I can then say, okay, ask her again. And I make him ask her, what is your pet? And she has to say it again. And now he can answer me. Can you train your students to start listening to each other by manipulating the classroom situation? Where they don't listen, you say, it can be a question like, do you agree with what she said? The student will say, I don't know, I wasn't listening. So you make them ask her to repeat. They won't like it at first. They'll be very grumpy about it. They'll say, what did you say? What did you say? But after a while, after a little while, they'll start to realise that it actually is the way you work. That you're not going to simply repeat everything that every student says. Then they start to listen to each other, and then you start to get some interaction. You actually get people responding to each other. My goal is to, as quickly as possible, stop needing to give instructions even. I'd like to respond silently. So she says something over there, I don't even say anything. I can just go with a gesture maybe, with a face, and he knows that I'm asking, do you agree? What do you think? And he's going to say something. I'm handing over what she said to somebody else. So much of classroom interaction is ping pong, ping pong, ping pong. Teacher asks a question, student answers the question, teacher repeats the student's answer. Teacher asks a new question, student says the answer, teacher repeats the student answer. All the lines of interaction go backwards and forwards, to and from the front of the room. It's okay sometimes, but that's very boring if that's the only interaction in the classroom. What I would like is I'd like to ask the question, somebody answers it, and then somebody else says something, maybe a different answer or a comment, somebody else says something, and we start to have a conversation where the students are listening to each other, where they're hearing and understanding what is said, and there is a genuine web, a tapestry of interaction in the room, instead of just backwards and forwards. As I've said, a lot of these techniques are incredibly simple, and I'm almost embarrassed to mention them because they're so simple, but they seem to me to make a big difference. And one of the biggest differences you can make is, when you ask a question, just wait a little bit longer for the answer. It's amazing how little time teachers can wait before they feel uncomfortable. Yeah? It's a very short time. For most teachers, if they don't have an answer in 1.5 seconds or 2 seconds, it already feels incredibly uncomfortable. Let me just do an experiment with you. Yeah? So I'm going to ask you, what's the capital of the United Kingdom? Yeah, the answer is London. That's the answer, okay? But I'm going to ask the student, let's have Can you be my volunteer student? Will you be my student? You don't need to do anything, just say yes if you're okay. Can you be my student? Okay, so I'm going to ask you the question. The answer is London, but don't say it. Just go, okay? Now, this is an experiment for you. See how long before you are uncomfortable, okay? Okay, right, so, class, what's the capital of the United Kingdom? What's the capital of the United Kingdom? Are you uncomfortable yet? Thank you. Did you start feeling uncomfortable after about just 1 or 2 seconds? Yeah? Because we're so used to coming in almost immediately. If a student can't produce an answer, Shazam, immediately, it starts to feel difficult. And yet for most students, that's not enough time. They have to find the answer, they have to put it into English, they have to move it from here down to here, they have to shape their mouth and produce the language. That was just a one-word fact answer, but most answers in English classes are actually more complicated than that. They have to actually produce new language, newly created language. So, if you can extend your waiting time, I'd like you just to try this as a quick experiment. So, with somebody next to you, you're going to ask, what did you do yesterday afternoon? What did you do yesterday afternoon? The person you ask can't make the answer. They're thinking and thinking, but they can't say it. Just see how long you can wait comfortably before you feel, ah! Okay, just try it. Ask the person next to you. Did you manage to wait for 5 seconds comfortably? Okay. Just remember, your students need more time. And if you can extend your comfortable waiting time by just a little bit even just by 1 second, you give more students a chance to say something useful in class. Just going to make a very brief comment. I'm going to talk a bit more about this afternoon in the workshop. We praise a lot in class. I don't know if you do. In the United Kingdom, we praise a lot. Every time a student says something, we say, good, very good, excellent, well done. And we say it, even if what they say is complete rubbish. We still say, very good, excellent. We've been taught to be very encouraging as teachers. Understandably, I mean, it's nice to encourage, but it's not actually very helpful. What students need very often is information to help them improve. So learning how to say, that's not right yet, you can do better, is actually a very useful thing to be able to do. I'm going to talk more about this afternoon, so I won't say more at the moment. I've mentioned a lot of this is to do with training students to listen to each other. Sometimes people ask me, what do I think it would be the most useful classroom management technique for teachers to learn? And I'd like to show you one technique now that I think is an absolutely crucial, central technique that makes all the difference. I think teachers who use this technique get more learning in their classroom. It's as simple as that. And it's not just for English language teaching, it's for teaching any subject, anywhere. And the technique is called not rubber stamping. Not rubber stamping. I'm going to show you what not rubber stamping is, but first of all I'd like to show you the opposite. I'd like to show you the opposite of this. I'd like to show you rubber stamping. Okay? I'll show you what this means. So I'm going to do a little listening lesson with you. So I've got my MP3 player here. Can you see it? Yeah. Good. Well done. Good. So here's my MP3 player, and I'm going to do just a little listening lesson. And this listening lesson, I've got a recording of announcements at an English train station. So it's announcements like the 11:45 train to Birmingham leaves from platform 2. It's that sort of thing, just announcements at a train station. Okay, so I'm going to do a listening lesson to help you get better at listening to station announcements. I'm going to need some volunteer students for this, because I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you a question, where does the 12 o'clock train go to? That's the question, okay? Can I have a volunteer student? Who would like to volunteer? Somebody over here. Got a volunteer student? Be brave. It's not a difficult job, I promise. Okay, thank you, volunteer student. It's okay, you don't need to come up. It's fine, you can stay there. When I ask you the question, where does the 12 o'clock train go to, could you say London? Okay? London is the correct answer. She's a very good student, very fast, okay? So London is the right answer to my question. Can I have another volunteer student, please? Can I have another volunteer student? Oh, right at the back. Hello, yes. Could you say Glasgow? Glasgow. So when I ask the question, where does the 12 o'clock train go to, you're going to say Glasgow. Glasgow is the wrong answer. Sorry. So you're going to say the wrong answer. Okay? Can I have one more volunteer student, please? One more volunteer? Be brave. Be brave. Yes, hello. Could you say Kuching? Kuching. Which is a ridiculous answer. Because generally in England, trains don't go to Kuching. Okay, so we've got 3 students, right? So we're going to have a listening lesson, okay? Just a mini listening lesson. Are you ready for it? So, okay, class. We're going to listen to some announcements in a railway station. Listen and tell me, where does the 12 o'clock train go? Where does the 12 o'clock train go? And then I play the recording. Okay, you have to pretend that's a real recording. Okay, so, where does the 12 o'clock train go to? Anybody? Yes, what do you think? London! Good! London! Good! 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 Excellent! Fantastic! London! London! Well done! Well done! Good! 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 Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Just going to stop there. He said Glasgow. In a real classroom, would he say Glasgow? No, why not? Why not? Okay, sorry. The answer is already given. Well, maybe she's wrong. Ah, yes. But I said good many times in many ways, yes? When you have an official document in Malaysia, do you have stamps, yes? Like red ink on them to say they're, yeah? Do you have that? I've taken my rubber stamp of teacher authority and I've put my rubber stamp on her answer. I said, good, well done, fantastic, you're brilliant, you're the greatest student. After I put my rubber stamp on, there is nowhere else to go. There's nowhere else to go. I'm wasting my time. If he says Glasgow, he knows he's wrong. He's either a very weak student who hasn't realised that I said that's the right answer. He wasn't listening. Or maybe he's a very strong student who thinks that he has a possible alternative answer. But that's rare. Most students in the average of the class will simply change their answer. So I say London, good, London, London, London. I ask him and he says, teacher, is it London? Yes, very good, you're right as well. Because students want to hear teacher telling them, you're correct, you're good. They want to hear that. So even though he had a different answer, he will change it to London. And you would probably change your answer as well. So rubber stamping extinguishes a question. All I find out is that one student has the right answer. Now, we can avoid that in many ways. There are obviously lots of ways to not rubber stamp. For example, I may ask students to talk together and say their answer to their partner. That's one very simple way of doing it. I might ask the students to write down their answers on a piece of paper and hold them up, and then I can see everybody in the room and their different answers. But imagine I'm doing the same thing. I'm checking the whole classroom like I'm doing now. And I ask her what her answer is, and she says London. What can I do to not rubber stamp? Can you speak louder, please? Ask around the room, but I did just now. How can I... What do I have to do with her? Sorry? Give little feedback. Say more. What do you mean by little feedback?
Accept the answer, but without a positive spin on it.
Okay, so you're saying accept the answer, but don't say if it's right or wrong. Okay. Okay, let me try that. So, we've played the recording. Okay, everybody, what do you think is the answer? Where does the 12 o'clock train go to? What do you think? London. Thank you. So, you think London? London, yes? Okay, anybody else? What do you think? Glasgow. Different answer. So, you thought London, you think Glasgow. Okay, anybody else? Kuching. Okay, thank you. Trying not to laugh. Okay, so we have three answers. London, Glasgow, Kuching. Any more answers? What do I need to do now? What do I need to do now? I have found out that in the room there are many different answers, which means they haven't done the listening yet, which means we need to listen again. And we need to have another go. And even the student or students who thought London was the answer, they are now thinking, oh, well, maybe it wasn't London. Maybe I did hear Glasgow. Maybe it was Glasgow. And they are going to listen again. There's actually still learning to be done. So this is a very important, crucial thing in teaching. Teaching is not collecting right answers. Sometimes we are misled into believing that our job is to collect correct answers as quickly as possible. What's the answer to number 1? Good. What's the answer to number 2? Good. What's the answer to number 3? Good. What's the answer to number 4? Good. What's the answer to number 5? That's not our job. Our job is to find out where the learning is. And we find out where the learning is by withholding, sometimes, our immediate approval, our validation of answers. We need to find out where the learning is still going on. You can't do that all the time with everything. Sometimes you do need to just quickly check what's number 1, what's number 2. Okay, that's fine. But if you only do that, then you never find out where the learning is in the room. So, not rubber stamping. We're trying to break out of the chase for correct answers, which seems to dominate so much classroom time. One of the techniques involved in this is blank face. she said London over here, when she said London, the second time, do you remember what I did? Not the first demonstration, but the second one. What did I say? I said, do you remember my words? This was your idea of accepting that she's given an answer, but not saying if it's right or wrong. I think I said something like, so you think London. That's quite a good formula of words. Ah, so you think London. I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm simply saying thank you for giving me the answer. But the problem is, teachers are very often so excited to hear the right answer, so relieved, oh thank goodness somebody's got the right answer, that you leak the fact that it's the answer. Let me show you what I mean by leaking. So I'm just going to do it one more time with you. So where do you think the 12 o'clock train went to? I'm trying not to say that it's the right answer, but somehow my head wants to nod and my mouth wants to smile. Yeah, so one skill is being able to keep your face relatively blank, not to reveal that that's the right answer. You can still be very positive with students. You know, they need positivity. Oh, thank you very much for giving an answer. You can still be very positive, but just hold back on the validation. Of course, you need validation at some point. At some point, you've got to confirm, okay, so we've got most of the class now says the answer is London. She still thinks it's Kuching, but most of the class agrees it's London. So, yes, you're right, it's London. At some point, you need to put that stamp of authority on the answer, but not at the beginning.
Excuse me, Jim?
Yes?
If I may ask you, if the question, the answer starts from the back, which is Glasgow, how would you react to that one?
I do it exactly the same way. The question was, if the first answer was Glasgow, what would I do? Well, let's try it. Is Mr. Glasgow still here? Are you still here, Mr. Glasgow? Okay, so let's start with that one. Okay, so sorry to interrupt your photography session, but so okay, we played the recording. Right, so where do you think the 12 o'clock train went to? Where do you think?
Glasgow.
Ah, so you think Glasgow, thank you. Okay, so Glasgow. Anybody else? Kuching. Okay, so you said Glasgow, you said Kuching. Anybody else? Yes, what do you think? You think London. Okay, thank you. So Glasgow, Kuching, London. I'll write those up. So it's exactly the same. Because I'm not stamping any of them, all I'm doing is saying thank you for giving me a possible answer. And I'm trying to keep my face blank. Whether it's a ridiculous answer, or a wrong answer, or a right answer. I'm going to show you just another example of not rubber stamping. This is probably a higher level than the students you teach. This is more a secondary level example. They've done a reading activity in class. So the students have done a reading comprehension exercise. I'm sure you can apply this and think about it with your own level students. The teacher is now checking the answers. So why did the sales team go to Delhi, Tom? They wanted to find new designs they could sell in England. Very good. And what happened when they got there, shall we? Their hotel was booked up and they had nowhere to stay. Excellent. So what did they do? Anyone? Yolanda? They slept in the street. Brilliant. Well done, everyone. So the teacher is checking the answers to a reading comprehension. He gets, or she gets, one answer from each student and immediately rubber stamps the answer. So again, the teacher has no idea whether or not the other students in the class are close to the answer. I'd like to show you one more example of not rubber stamping. I'd like to show you an example you will hate. You won't like this one. Or maybe you will, but I think at least half of you won't like it. So, this is an example of playing devil's advocate. I don't know if you're familiar with the phrase. If you play devil's advocate, it means you make an argument for something you don't actually believe yourself. Let me give you an example of playing devil's advocate for a speaking lesson. So maybe we started off with, I asked you about smoking. Maybe I want to have a discussion in my classroom about smoking. Well, I could come in and say, okay everybody, let's have a discussion about smoking. And the students go, boring. Or I could come in to the lesson and say, hey, you know, last night I suddenly had an idea. I realised smoking is good for you. Smoking is good for you. And the students go, huh? What? Teacher, what? Smoking is good? And you have a discussion that's starting. You're starting it by playing devil's advocate, by saying something that you don't actually believe yourself. So let me show you an example of playing devil's advocate with a language lesson. This is a grammar lesson. Again, I think this is higher than the levels you teach with, but I hope you get the idea from this. You can do this with any level of student. In this case, the students have done a grammar exercise about comparatives. You know, something is bigger than something, longer than something. The students have done the exercise individually, and the teacher is now checking in the class. So the teacher says, okay, so what's the answer to question 6? And the student says, Mohammed is taller than his brothers. Now that's the correct answer. So a normal rubber-stamping teacher at this point would say, good, well done, excellent, fantastic, brilliant, and extinguish the question. But this teacher is going to play devil's advocate. So the student says, Mohammed is taller than his brothers, and the teacher says, oh, I think it's Mohammed is more tall than his brothers. And the student looks very puzzled. And there is silence in the room for 25 minutes. Well, 20 seconds maybe. And then the student says, teacher, is that really the correct answer? And the teacher says, yes, more tall, don't you agree? And the student says, I think that with tall you have to make taller, not more tall. And the teacher says, oh, what do you think? What do you think? Is he right? Maybe, yes, I wrote taller. But can we use ER? I'm not sure. More tall? It sounds wrong to me. I think with short words, you usually use ER, not more. The teacher gives in and says, ah yes, well done. I think you're right and I'm wrong. Everyone laughs. Let's check the rule. Now, I warned you that you probably wouldn't like this technique. A lot of teachers would say this is a very dangerous technique because they think that for the teacher to model incorrect English is very dangerous. That's fine. If you believe that, that's fine. Don't do this. But I would just like to point out what's interesting here. What's interesting is that all the students had the correct answer. They already had the correct answer, but there was still useful learning to do. They had to put the rule back in their heads, they had to process it, they had to take it apart and put it together again, they had to rethink the whole question. And I would argue that they come out of that stronger than they were before, understanding with greater depth. They didn't just choose an answer, tick, 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 quickly at random. They've now been made to really think about it. And I would suggest they come out better at the end of that process. You can do this in a very simple way at much, much lower levels. So, for example, if you're teaching animal names to your class, and you hold up a picture of a cat, and you've already taught this, you're practicing now. You've taught this many times. You hold up the picture of a cat and you say, this is a rabbit. And the students all go, no, teacher, no, it's a cat. And you go, oh yes, you're right, I'm wrong. Children love that. They love it when their teacher is making a mistake. And once they learn that you do this deliberately, they start to enjoy it. And instead of believing everything you say, they start to process everything you say. Because they know that sometimes you play this game of not telling the complete truth. And it becomes part of the game of the classroom. If everything you say is true, students don't listen to you. If sometimes you tell them things that make them think a little bit more, they start listening more carefully. Okay, I've shown you a number of ideas. I'd like you just to take 1 minute. Tell somebody or some people near you which one of those ideas do you like most? Which one might you try yourself in the classroom, in your classroom? Just tell somebody next to you. Which one is your favourite? Okay, can I just hear from 1 or 2 people, which idea are you taking away? Just tell me, which idea? Put up your hand, because you don't need to say more than which idea. Which idea are you taking away? Devil's advocate. Oh, devil's advocate. Okay. Which idea are you taking away? No ideas. Oh, okay. Not rubber stamping. I'm very glad to hear that. That's my favourite. Let's hear 1 or 2 more. What are you taking away? Gathering attention. Okay. Nice. Let's hear 1 more. Pausing a little longer. Okay. So a variety of different techniques. I hope there was something in there, at least, that was a useful idea for your own classroom. Thank you very much. It's been lovely to be here.